Now, there's no doubt COVID-19 has caused chaos in our lives, physically and mentally as well. The pandemic has led teachers to an unpredictable scenario where lockdowns have accelerated the shift from tradition to online educational methods. Depression, trauma and anxiety are just some of the things teachers are also struggling with. Physical activity seems to be one of the factors that could help manage mental disorders and also anxiety amongst teachers. For more on this, I'm now joined by Dr. Alicia Porter from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Dr. Porter, thank you so much. A very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. So we tend to look at teachers as, these, superhuman beings that, take care of our kids, do everything once we leave our kids in their care. But they're also vulnerable, aren't they?
I think that, good evening, Tony. I think that teachers are very vulnerable. And I do think that we've focused a lot on the children. And I think we've forgotten about the teachers and the role that they have to play in supporting children. And if they are not okay, it makes it more difficult and more challenging to actually focus and support children and adolescents.
Doctor, talk to us about some of those vulnerabilities, especially during the pandemic.
I think we've definitely seen an increase in anxiety, an increase in depression, an increase in stress among teachers, because there's so many challenges which teachers are facing, which, again, I don't think that we've paid enough attention to. With school closures, we focused on the children and the impact that that has. But we've forgotten, that teachers have had to abruptly close school. They've had to move on to online platforms. They've had to learn technology. They've also had to deal with and support learners who've had multiple losses. So they've been teacher, they've been parent, they've been social worker, so they really have multiple challenges which they have faced, which have been quite unprecedented. And there isn't a manual that teachers, have that says this is how, you need to do it during a pandemic, because this has never been before.
So we're looking forward to some, in-person education, hopefully sometime. Well, it is taking place at the moment. But, so that teacher now has to, make that transition from, trying to teach online and now go back to that in-person, dealing with the kids and so forth. What are we equipping our teachers with the, the skill set and, to be able to deal with a lot of the things that you just spoke about now in terms of the kids, read the kids' anxieties and so forth. And then at the same time, do we teach our teachers, per se, to also look after themselves?
I think that we do need to focus on teaching teachers how to take care of themselves, because it really is about teaching them to put on their oxygen masks first, because if they are okay, they will then in turn, the students will be okay. So I do think that there should be an emphasis on the mental health of teachers, not necessarily mental illness, but how do we promote mental wellness among teachers so that the system remains healthy and the system then continues.
What are the things that a teacher can do, in order to, if they're feeling anxious, if, they're feeling under pressure and so forth, because I'm sure they're looking at those kids, we assume that the teachers love so much. But again, like, you're on an aeroplane and they say, put that oxygen mask on first. You put it on first before you try to help somebody else. You have any tips for teachers?
Yes, I think the first thing is that they do need to promote their own self-care. So they need to choose how they spend their time, but just simple things like, focusing in on what they eat, hydrating themselves, just getting enough sleep. Those are fundamentals to self-care. Also just being more mindful, exercising, rest, doing things that they enjoy. Also just modeling self-compassion, because, we teach it, but they need to model it so that their students actually are able to practice self-compassion as well. And also to set reasonable expectations. You know, we need to understand and acknowledge that we are in the middle of a pandemic. It is not business as usual. And so we need to adjust expectations in that regard. And just maintaining connection, for example, just that WhatsApp to a family, friend, colleague, that goes a long way in promoting mental wellness. And although we've been isolated, that connection definitely assists in promoting mental wellness. And just being able to we call it micro recharges. Sometimes we don't have the luxury of going away for a prolonged period or having long holidays. But you can find things that you can do during the day that just help to balance your nervous system, to bring it down into more of a balance, like just breathing or washing your hands mindfully, or when you're walking upstairs, to just do so more mindfully. And there's also, what we call a 30-30 approach, where you either can take 30 seconds to do, a small activity that's going to assist you, in calming or regulating, or if you've got 3 minutes or 30 minutes, depending on, how much time you have, you could actually do one of these things just to help you to pause, to self-regulate. So these are just some of the practical things that you can do where you are without necessarily having to leave the comfort of your classroom or leave the comfort of your home, just in order to cope with the stresses that teachers are facing at the moment.
And one of the things you say in your recent article is that you're advising teachers to acknowledge that this is not a normal situation, to acknowledge that they are scared, to basically allow themselves to feel that anxiety and so forth. That's also advice that you give?
Yes, because a lot of the time, this idea that I must be the only one experiencing this. So if we can normalize it in the sense that we acknowledge that we are not alone, it goes a long way in assisting us and also decreasing the stress, because there's this realization that we are not alone, and it does go a long way once we acknowledge that we are not okay.
Yep. Thank you so much, Dr. Alicia Porter, there from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, talking about the anxiety that our teachers are also going through during the pandemic. Not just the kids, it's also the caregivers.